So, up to now I have a history of not many views of any of my videos. And so, in a way that's good for me because it allows me to feel like I'm reaching toward an audience that hasn't shown up yet. And my name is Michael Miller. This is a Michael Miller trademark training video out to you because you're watching. It's meant for Michael Miller Pilates licensed affiliates, the Corner Core, my patrons, Clayton, Ruby, and Stephanie, and anyone interested in surviving and thriving as a Pilates instructor. And my addition to that is something about under the presumption that I'm broadcasting to you as a student. You can be whoever you are, and you can belong to or not to any of those groups I talked about. But I choose in the broadcast to consider you as a student, and if that's too offensive for you, then don't watch, because there's nothing for you to learn here. So, today's Monday. Friday was the solstice at 9:54. I was actually at Lost Gulch Overlook and looked at my phone, and it came up 9:54. More people and surprising people showed up. Precious people showed up that were completely unexpected, and yet so Friday I didn't broadcast. I was a little busy, and Saturday and Sunday I don't broadcast. So this is Monday, and a lot of what is the rest of my titles are reflections on what occurred or what came out of my participation in the MMPC, Michael Miller Pilates Convention. So, number 2 on my titles is to live out your dreams. Make plans and then complete those plans, or live out, did I say live out your dreams? And I say that because after I left the party at the Momentum Fest, the custom is to have a concluding ceremony at the corner bar at the Boulderado. And it was late, so I wasn't sure if it'd still be open, but I went anyway, just to connect to the tradition I had created for myself. And it was open, and I had a drink with a really large ice cube in it. And it made for having been there as well over the last few conventions that are celebrated on the solstice. And it wouldn't have been the same if I had just gone home compared to going there, and the energy was so good, the bartender was so good, the environment was just perfect way to bring the convention to a conclusion. So I recommend that you try to repeat that plan, because I've become very fond of it. With or without anyone showing up at different parts of it. People have precious time, and so number 3, my title is That Love Never Dies. I'm sure that's the title of a few movies and a few songs. And there's a reason for that. Then number 4 is a quote I wrote down from a fascinating conversation I had, who I think I want to leave unnamed to not put pressure there. But you'll know her if you know what she says. She says all the time, which is every joint, every way, every day. Every joint, every way, every day. That says a lot in 6 words. Right? Okay. And it comes from someone having just, in the midst of completing their study in chiropractic. And at one point in our conversation, talking about joints and movement and this and that, she says to me, quite assuredly, that it all comes down to physics. And I agree with her in a lot of ways. I think, okay, so it's so fascinating having a conversation from someone with someone else that has their own point of view, and it's solid and has a lot of longevity behind it, a lot of experience, a lot of intellect. And coming down to someone who talks about it coming down to physics, right, would take me to my number 5 title, which is, Are You Looking Through the Eyes of Cornu? So, gosh, if you've never heard anything other than this recording, you have to watch more. Cornu tension is when you make oppositional rotation between axes. It's called that because I'm identifying that as being a dynamic within the human body that the body uses to move through space. Not an image, just a biomechanical fact. And so, what I found as a difference in point of view is the presumption and the dismissal of reality, and then the rest of the world in terms of seeking, I don't know, bringing someone back to a reality. Improving people's lives. Pilates improves people's lives, and yes, indeed it does. And there's this two-way street where you come to Pilates with whatever history you have, whatever baggage you're carrying, whatever experience you're made of, and immediately learn something about Pilates that adds to your baggage, and you get drawn toward, in my opinion, addressing human beings because what it is you're sharing with them is so beneficial to them. And because human beings are all individual in an expression of their, I want to say, ideal selves. And it maybe doesn't even have to be ideal, but just take the normal population of humanity and create what kind of bell curve you want over that, however you want to judge human beings. In some way, the bulk of the expression of a human being, I think, can be at least idealized in the terms of symmetry and number of limbs and it was so fun talking to someone who's talking physics, talking about planes, a plane in physics, like a midline that cuts through the body is a plane that divides the body in half. See how I've come with that? So the point about my number 5, are you looking through the eyes of Cornu, is if you're willing to admit that physics has a lot to do with what goes on in dealing with the body, wouldn't it help to understand the reality in order to deal with diversion from the norm, or in order to deal with advancing in the spectrum, like toward fitness, toward health, out of the other end of the spectrum, which you might consider unhealthy or pain. So I think looking through the eyes of Cornu will eventually become the foundation for looking through the eyes of MMP. Because Cornu is an identification of biomechanics that no one else acknowledges, that I know of, except you and a sprinkling of other people around the world, which gives me confidence. But the thing I want to point to is my number 6, which is a quote. And it's not from that person. It's a quote that we often hear in any language that says, "What do you think you're doing?" It's a challenge often. What do you think you're doing? What were you thinking? Right? A challenge to your thinking, like, are you out of your mind? And yet mind is thinking, right? And yet evidently the thinking that you're acknowledged doing that is out of your mind is really happening in your mind, but not the kind of thinking that someone is challenging. Does any of that make sense? This is such a tough thing, trying to discuss deep subjects on a brief. So I got that far. What are you doing? And then that's what are you doing? Yes. Have you ever heard the one about it's easy for thinking to get in the way, or you overthink it, right? And I would suggest much of the Pilates culture exclusively thinks it. Meaning that they make of Pilates whatever their thinking makes of it within a thinking world and settles for that. Why wouldn't you if thinking occupies all the air in your simulation? or most of it, or predominates, always come back to the instructor is seeking to coordinate being, thinking, and observing. And that because it's all three of them, they share an equal importance in getting to the experience, which is an MMP presumption that there is an experience, that it requires complete coordination of being, thinking, and observing. And all of that stays within the realm of physics when you acknowledge in quantum physics, observing has indications of superluminality and non-locality. And so I'm right there with you when Pilates is sacred to me as an individual in my experience because of what it does or what I connect to in doing it. Because the observing to me is a capacity within the human being, any life form really, but I limit Pilates instruction to human beings. And so, what are you thinking? What are you doing? What were you thinking? And easy for thinking to get in the way, the way of what? Whatever derivative you want to make out of Pilates, for whatever reason, the more you understand the original, the more it empowers you to make of it whatever you want. And I think Pilates as a subject or as a point of view is heavily limited to the end of the spectrum where Pilates has no essence of its own. And yet survival as a Pilates instructor requires you to be aware of what makes it what it is so that you can surf on the tsunami of Pilates passion and not get overwhelmed by it. What do you think you're doing? In this two-way street of Pilates where you show up and immediately everything is toward the client and it's all about the student and bringing them to a higher state of control in themselves. Contrology, right? To get healthier, to get better, stronger, more flexible, but to be in a position where you have more control, right? The other direction of traffic in Pilates is not toward the human being and their issues, whatever they are, or just the expression of themselves in whatever expression that is individual to that human being. But the pursuit in Pilates goes the other way because it's a pursuit of surviving. And as such, within MMP, taking body, mind, and spirit to mean being, thinking, and observing, three distinct things. He didn't call it body, mind, and more mind. And in MMP, spirit is observing. And that observing is happening outside of the realm of thinking. And so it's very simple and direct and biologic and everything pure, not to get too abstract about what I always say about connecting to the universe faster than light. When the pursuit of the ideal just within the reality that we are sure of, it was so great to reach an agreement with someone that the space we occupy is three-dimensional. So I've got these notes about what's the difference between being a mechanic and being a race car driver. And then, that's an old one. And then, more to the point I'm reaching for that I'm having a hard time getting to. What's the difference between a mechanic and riding shotgun? So riding shotgun means being a passenger in a vehicle that someone else is driving. And so I hope you click into the metaphor of that. The person is the driver of their own body, and as a Pilates instructor, you ride shotgun while they're driving. And that's different than the car in the garage not moving and being worked on in a way that you can't work on it when it's racing. See? And to me, there's a distinction there about the direction, and as skilled as you wish to get in how you interact person to person as a Pilates instructor, meaning what kinds of education you have to get in more and more countries to be able to physically cue a student, kind of thing, right? I made an effort to, and of course this is in a backdrop of really loud disco music, which was good and bad, of talking about Pilates in one word is exercise, and Pilates in two words, you know this if you've been listening, is corrective exercise, and the correction that is happening is coming off of the sensation from the effort being made. Right? It's live, it's real time, and that the student, I think I made a connection there as to the role of the instructor and how one goes in and dances within that corrective feedback loop of the student's own sensation, right? Playing Yoda, telling them what to listen to as they dive into the concentration of their own sensation, and from that be able to take more control of their effort. What I didn't have any sense of, and maybe that's all just assumed, and maybe it doesn't matter this way on the road toward whatever Pilates is in and of itself. I think it's inevitable that if Pilates has any essence of its own, it will be like a teeter-totter, and the more people that recognize its essence and gravitate toward that will end up tilting the spectrum toward the ideal rather than away from it. Has to. Because humanity has this way of absorbing things and coming to understand things and making explanations of things that not only make sense, but produce data to back it up. So when an MMPLA candidate, unannounced, says they're interested in participating in research as part of becoming an MMPLA, surely there will be those that go off into making tests or documenting or constructing thesis on the biomechanics and the math that this points to. Why don't I go do all that? I'm a Pilates instructor, and I don't feel that needing to prove it will enhance my understanding of it or my confidence in what I know from it. I might learn more. I might get more thinking. So I have this plastic thing that is pieces of plastic that you can just pull apart and then pop back together. Okay? And when we take each piece individually and line them up, we get to an approximation of what's straight from piece to piece. Have you guessed I might be talking about vertebrae? And yet, no matter, you see, it's much more fluid and much more continuous. I haven't done this in a long time, but when you apply tension and just make the pieces align within the tension that you offer or provide, right? And so between here and here, and between here and here, when you apply core new tension, it's the biodynamic rotation, it's the rotational dynamic interacting with other rotational dynamic that gives you this tension. And it's from this tension that the pieces float within the tension and adjust and align themselves because of the tension. And it's just biology and physics. And that goes back to, so are you looking through the eyes of Cornu? The hard part to digest is the distinction between thinking and observing, and thinking giving recognition to observing as something beyond its thinking, which is hard to do because it seems like we are our thoughts, and yet a real key part of us is not just the prefrontal cortex, but everything that feeds information into it. it's in there, it's in that electrical storm of new data and processing and the body happening that the human being makes a connection with its environment and seeks to survive in it, because life can't live forever. Read between the lines, see behind the curtain, add two and two. Direct your thinking. Geist.